Hey, what's up? It's John, aka GP13 or Golden Pants 13. I'm a professional sports bettor with over 7 figures in sports betting profit. The sole goal of this channel is to provide the best sharp betting educational content in the space, and I think it's clear at this point that it delivers this. So if you want to fight the good fight against the shift towards the lowest common denominator in gambling content, please drop a like, subscribe, comment, anything that could help in the algo. I hear that stuff helps the algo. I don't know, like praise. This video will kind of be about betting an algo. So let's, start off by appeasing the YouTube algo, dropping that like, and let's get right on to the topic. The topic today is how to most profitably bet a sports betting model. This is going to encompass both bottom-up models and top-down models. I will have examples for both. It will be slightly skewed towards bottom-up, but there will be plenty of top-down, actionable top-down advice that I've used while building my own top-down model that powers GP Picks Plus. So stick around for that and let's get right into it. Okay, first let's start off by trying to define what a model is in sports betting without getting academic in dictionary definitions or whatever. To make this video easier, so we're all on the same page, is something that spits out what I call a fair probability. So a fair probability, it's the same thing that the sportsbook's trying to do. You're trying to spit out the likelihood that a given event will happen. So the easiest way to visualize this is, let's say we're trying to figure out the likelihood of LeBron James getting over 7.5 assists in the game tonight. And we have a model, and the requirement to make that a model is that it tells us some percentage chance that LeBron gets over 7.5 and under 7.5 assists in that game. And that's what we call a fair probability. Our fair for him getting over 7.5 assists would be, 60%. And then that means that our fair for him going under 7.5 is the rest of the probability, which is 40%. So that's a model. It's going to spit out a probability for the likelihood that an event occurs, and then because the event is mutually exclusive at 7.5, it's not at 7. But the flip side, the inverse, is how likely the event is not to occur, which is under 7.5 assists. So we're just trying to predict the probability that something happens, like I alluded to, in two different ways. One is called bottom-up modeling, and that is simply whenever you're using data from the sport, your own knowledge of the sport, and you're not reliant solely on what the other sports books in the market are pricing something. So you bring in a lot of data from the sport, you use your brain, you clean the data, put it in a database, and use it to do one of the many available modeling techniques, linear regression, logistic regression, kind of whatever it is. And it spits out your fair probability, and it relies on data from the sport and your own observations. That's what we call bottom-up originating. What you're doing there is you're creating a number that you could create with or without market information. So even if you didn't see any sports book post the bet, you could still price that bet if somebody asked you, right? If you were pricing basketball props and somebody said, what is the probability LeBron James gets over 7.5 assists, and you couldn't go and look on a odds screen or anything to see what other books are pricing it, if you could still price that on your own, then that would be a bottom-up modeling approach. Okay, so top-down betting, it's less intuitive for people who are just getting into sports betting than bottom-up betting, because bottom-up betting is like, hey, I really follow the sport. I know this stuff about the sport. I follow the data. I think there's interesting angles here or there. Let me see if that is something that could make me some money. I think that's like, if you first picture sports betting, that's what you think of. Top-down betting, it's much more of a market-based approach. And actually, if you're new to top-down betting, you should go back and watch the 2-hour sports betting masterclass I released for free. It's on my YouTube. I think it's called 6-Figure Sports Betting. So go find that, watch that. It's mostly about top-down betting. And then you can kind of come back to this one and we'll go more in the weeds. Top-down betting is only possible because different sports books have different prices on certain props. So if we go back and we think about that 6.5 assists LeBron James, over under. Let's say that DraftKings has the over at plus 120. There's another book that's offering it. Let's call it Pinnacle. They have the over at, minus 110, and they have the under at minus 120, right? This is a situation where you still don't have a profitable arb, so you could go plus 120, minus 120. You're not really making any money. But if you do believe that one of the two sports books is sharper than the other, let's say like DraftKings is like plus 120, minus 140, right? You might want to take, the minus 120 on the under on Pinnacle or the plus 120 on the over on DraftKings. In this situation, maybe you side with Pinnacle and you want to bet the plus 120 on DraftKings. But I don't know, maybe you've collected a lot of data and it shows that DraftKings is actually pretty good at pricing NBA assists. This is not true. This is not the truth. I'm not telling you to tail DraftKings, but that's some place that you can go with top-down betting and how you can refine your model, because your fair could be so many different things with just this information. A top-down model could say DVIG Pinnacle, that's your fair. DVIGing is like just removing the juice from both sides of the line, and you arrive at a probability that you deem to be their fair, and you assume the sportsbook has a fair. With those two pieces of information, your top-down model could be like an infinite number of different fairs. So that's what I mean when we're talking about how to bet a top-down model and how to bet a bottom-up model, right? So now we've kind of we understand the terms, we understand what we're looking to do. So like, let's get into the good stuff and figure out how we can make some money. Okay, the first thing that we all have to accept, and it's painful as sports betting modelers, is that our model, our precious little baby model, is wrong, and it's bad, and it's not the truth, and it never will be the truth. But that's okay. That's okay. Instead of having the mindset like this model has to be perfect, right? And you're tweaking it until the end of time to get some perfection that will never exist, we have to realize that we're trying to predict events where no fair probability actually exists. Yeah, you could get very philosophical here, but basically you're coming in and you're not modeling something like blackjack, which has like a very clear distribution of what can happen, and you can model it perfectly if you know the rules, the spread you're using, and the deck penetration. You can model it perfectly. You cannot do that with sports. You're betting on human beings, doing a human being thing. So every model is a guess, and every guess is wrong, including the sports book. So it's okay, right? So our model is wrong, their model is wrong. So what's our goal? I believe our goal as modelers is to have our model become the most important piece of information that we weigh when making a betting or a trading decision in sports betting. That's the pinnacle. That's as high as you can get, right? Your model might not even, a good model could not even be the biggest piece of information weighed. Like you could have a model that adds some value to a bottom-up model that adds some value to a very top-down heavy strategy. And you might be weighing the market 80% and your bottom-up model 20. But if it's adding some value, then that's great. The highest praise of a model is that you're giving it the most weight of anything in your process, and you can give it higher and higher weight, the more and more advantage that you feel like you have, or you prove that you have on the market. So instead of our goal being, hey, we want this to be perfect, we want to maybe say, hey, we want to make this as important as we can, but not lose the fact that it's still our duty to trade it, to weigh market information, to weigh sports information, and all these other factors when our model spits out a bet. And to just solidify how I like to think about modeling, I'm going to give you, or modeling and betting, and how modeling relates to actually betting the model. I'll give you my favorite analogy that possibly has been put into my brain by watching a lot of Drive to Survive recently. But I like to think of modeling as an F1 car. And you as a trader, the person who's seeing the outputs from the model and actually placing the bets or sending the bets out as the driver. If you've not watched Drive to Survive, that's insane. You should go watch it now. The gist of it is like you have two teammates and they always have the same car. Teammate A always wants to beat teammate B because it's the only fair comparison, because the ability of the cars in F1 is varies greatly. So teams spend all of this money building their cars. Think about it like hedge funds spending all of this money building their models, or bettors spending all this money and time building their sports betting models, right? Within the same car, you have like a Lewis Hamilton and a Bottas, or a Max Verstappen and a Perez, where one driver beats the other driver almost every single time. And that's what a good trader can do to elevate a model. You have a model, and sometimes people think, oh, my model has an ROI of this. Well, that's not true. Let's say you have a model that backtests and it wins like 2% against the close, right? Your model doesn't win at 2%. What you have is a model that backtested and won against 2% against the close, and that's it. What your model wins at, it's a range, right? Assuming that your backtest was solid, the best outcome of your model trading it over a year or two might be 3, 4, 5%, where your worst outcome could be break even, -1%. And a good trader moves you up in that distribution of outcome. The way I like to think about it is model is a car, the trader is the driver. Both need to be good to be really great. The model or your model's strengths and weaknesses are one of three key things that you have to consider before, after, whenever betting a sports betting model. Your model's strengths and weaknesses. There's sport information, and then there's market information. Market information is the biggest and probably the most important of the three buckets. I'm going to cover that extensively last, but we're going to start with your model's strengths and weaknesses. What we're going to do is we're going to look at two different models that would be strong and weak. Who knows if we'll have to take that out in post. So one model would be strong in a situation where the other model would be weak, and vice versa. So we're going to call them Model A, Model B. So let's talk about these two models. Okay, in this example, both of our models are going to be bottom-up models. And it doesn't really matter what sport they are, but let's just, for the sake of just easy visualization, let's call them football models, right? Model A is a model that uses the end of the season or some kind of conglomeration of team power rankings, and then the modeler uses their ball knowledge to evaluate the off-season moves that each NFL team makes. We're going to assume this person has serious knowledge, domain knowledge of football. Then be like, okay, he will probably play in this position. In this, defensive scheme, he will either work better than he worked on his last team or worse, or he's going to plug a big hole because the player he's replacing was excessively bad or whatever. And they're going to kind of understand how these players fit. Model B is going to be taking all of the play-by-play data, the weather data, any other pieces of information that could be valuable, cleaning them, structuring them into a database, and basically poking them until good kind of novel angles arise from this. So this model does a great job at being robust, taking a lot of data, and using that data to find edges that are probably not baked into the market. So it's going to have element of a data advantage to it. Like there's some proprietary data going into the model. It could be kind of your own hand mapping of, what you think of these teams or their past games, and then it's going to include a lot of play-by-play data, and it's going to be heavily reliant on basically the strength of building an awesome database. This model is generating its own power rankings, right? And the power rankings are going to become better the more data the model has, as the advantage here is solely from having better data and analyzing it better. So as you can start to see, these models are different, and I think you might start to kind of jump ahead and understand where one might be good and the other might be bad. Or if you trade Model A in a way that you trade Model B and it wins, Model A will lose, and vice versa. You can't trade them like the other model. They outperform and underperform in the exact opposite situation. So they would actually be very complementary, but let's get into why one model will do well in a certain situation when the other model does poorly, and vice versa. The interesting thing about these two models is they're actually spitting out the same thing. They're spitting out a team power ranking that's then going to be used to get totals and spreads and whatever it is, and some type of using that power ranking or that power rating for a team to determine distributions for those different bets, right? So they're both getting team power ratings, but they're doing it very differently. Model 1, this is like the ball knower model. Where it wins is the person who has the domain knowledge to understand how certain players will click or not click into certain teams, and how big of an upgrade is so and so for there, or is this coach going to work well with this quarterback, all of these things. This type of modeler, what they're really doing is they're arriving at the true team strength faster than the rest of the market. So when the season starts, somebody who's more of a data heavy modeler, example B, model 2, I forgot if we're calling them model B or model 2, but interchangeable. So that person is probably going to take a little longer to get confident in their model because their model thrives on data, right? And even thrives on them, hand grading certain data, but they still need games and they need play-by-play data to have their model spit out what they believe to be a good power ranking. But the beauty of model A, of the ball knower, is their model thrives in an area of low data. And this is actually very common to more domain knowledge ball knower spots, is you can be more confident if this is kind of your style when you're in low data situations. And this situation is exactly why, because you're competing against kind of the other style of modelers, which is data heavy. Well, this person's not going to be very confident at the beginning of the year because they're going to have to see the play-by-play data come in, and they're going to have to hand grade the games to get an actual understanding of how good the teams are this year. Where what you're trying to do is you're trying to front run that process and make an educated guess as to which pieces kind of came in and out, and better predict the team values, or better get to that, or faster get to that true team value before the data heavy models catch up. So if you were that modeler, you'd want to be going really hard in the beginning of the season. That would be your prime time. And then you'd want to really scale it back as the season went on. Maybe there's a kind of reset during the trade deadline or whatever it is. I'm not familiar. But what you want to be doing is you want to live in those low data areas as like a ball knower. And in this specific situation, your advantage is judging the offseason better than the market. So to really lay the hammer down, you want to be betting, big early. And then let's think of the flip side. The flip side of model 1 is model 2. And if you were to bet model 2, the data heavy model, like we just talked about, the optimal way to bet model 1, you would do really poorly. And that's because even though the strength of your model is, using data to come to very good, robust power ratings for teams, your end of the season power ratings from last year might be the best end of the season power ratings. But if you haven't updated them for the trades that have happened and the players that have left and been replaced, or you haven't updated them in a very thoughtful way, then you're going to be back behind the 8 ball to people like modeler number 1, who's built model 1, right? If you were to go in and blast early, you would do very poorly. So data heavy models, kind of obvious, but do well in situations where there's a lot of data available. Now, you're still going to want to have, proprietary data any way you can. You want to get hard to get data. You want to hand collect data if you can. All of these things are still true. It's not like, you can win 3 months into the season using just like a basic API. There's a lot of data now. Like that still doesn't work. The data heavy modeler still has to be differentiated in some way in obtaining and structuring that data, right? But it does mean that you need the data. And it's just not going to happen the first week or 2 of the season. So when the first modeler is betting heavy, the second modeler should be hitting the brakes, once they feel like they've have enough to arrive at better than market team ratings, then they can start increasing their size as the season goes on. So it's almost like modeler A starts here, modeler B starts here, and they cross, at some point in the season. And while A is hitting the brakes, B is hitting the gas. So this is a good example of how like 2 models should be traded differently, and how your skill as a trader and how you conceptualize your model's strengths and weaknesses play a big part in how you can get the maximum out of the model, when times are good, and then how to lose the least when your model is not in a situation where it inherently would perform well in. Let's quickly talk about the second thing that you need to consider when, betting a model, which is the actual sport information. Some people say sports don't matter. You don't need to know anything about sports to win sports betting. I'd say technically that might be true, but it sure helps to know about sports. And here's why. Common things within the sport that are important to consider would be injuries, lineup news, and then, just more like motivational and soft factors. So let's start with injuries. First of all, knowing that somebody's injured is generally pretty helpful. And it's not just like, oh, they're injured, so they're out. They might be injured in playing. That's actually more important because you want to be able to judge the severity of their injury and adjust them and their skill appropriately. Like if you think of it, what's the most impactful position in sports? That would be, football quarterback. So a lot of the talk last offseason when the Chiefs were pushing to the Super Bowl was like, how healthy is Mahomes, right? Is Mahomes at 100%? Is he at 90, 80? And what does that mean? Like, what does that actually mean in terms of point spread, total, money line, right? For example, in golf, which is the majority of what I bet, this past week, I had to make a decision on if I thought Wyndham Clark was injured when he withdrew on the back nine of round 2 of the Players with neck pain, or if I thought that he kind of like rage quit and that he, they have to say something when they withdraw. And this is what he kind of cited. It's more frequently like pushing you to pass on a bet than it is to, really go out and find new bets. One thing like a model, especially if it's plugged into the market, is really good at is it's good at like asynchronously like grabbing every bet and coming back. As a human, you have to go through it, right? So if you're kind of going as a human, just using your, whatever kind of ball knowledge thing is in your head, you're still gonna have to go one by one by one. Oftentimes, if you want to efficiently build it into your process, a lot of times it's like that last screening thing where the model goes out, grabs all these bets, and then you look and you say, is there a reason that that's showing such big value? Does anything jump out at me? Like that's showing value, but I don't account for Mahomes playing injured or something like that, right? It sounds obvious, but at the same time, it's still something that you need to consider, especially if you're betting bottom up. Like it really helps to know the sport, and it doesn't help necessarily. Like you're not adding upside, but you're cutting your downside. Is a team actually rewarded for winning these games, or are they going to kind of play soft? Every sport has situations at the end of the year when, certain teams, there's no benefit to them winning the game at all. Besides practicing, there's probably no reason they should play any of their starters. So just being aware of this, using it to either say, hey, let's pump the brakes. This is a place where my model might not do well at the end of the season, might be more of a no ball spot because you kind of have to judge the motivation factors. And it might not be a pure data modeler spot. So maybe the data modeler just says, hey, look, I'm not betting this week. Maybe I'm not betting the playoffs. It's different, whatever it is. And then the ball knower is going to kind of get in there and be like, this is a good situation because of XYZ, right? You might need to check it, or you might be like, oh, this is a really good situation for my model. Now we're at the big finale. This is the most important job of a sports betting trader, is to be able to react to the information that's being presented to you in the market, incorporate that into your process, into your model, adjust your model for that information, or just make kind of hand decisions on whether to take or not take something based on what the market is saying. If we go back to the race car example for a little bit, you have your trader, that's our driver, we have our car, that's the model, and then we have the market. The market is all of the other drivers, the track conditions, all of this information, at the start of the race now being presented in real time to the driver, and the driver's going to have to adjust, react to that, and act optimally. And I think that ties a nice bow on my Drive to Survive recent binge. Let's set up a situation. There are 2 separate bets that we're evaluating. So bet 1, we have a fare of, minus 110. The bet's minus 105. The bet is into a book that we deem to be very square. Let's say it's BetMGM, right? We think that this is not a very sharp book. We have a small edge. But now, let's say on the same bet, a book that we think is very, very sharp, or the sharpest in this specific market, is showing minus 150, right? In this situation, our fair value might be wrong to the downside. Like the fair might actually be much higher when you see what Pinnacle is posting in the market. Even though we show a very small edge with our model, and with maybe even an edge we would be passing, like a minus 110 fair on a minus 105. I mean, a lot of people would just pass on that edge when you see Pinnacle be there and give you a lot of confidence in your number. Your true fair in this situation, you're probably low, right? So maybe your true fair is minus 120, minus 125. Let's say we have the kind of exact same situation, but Pinnacle's not there, and we're showing a bet into like a bet online. Our historic track record against them is not as strong as a historic track record against MGM, so we're a little careful, but they're showing a bet for minus 105, and our fair is showing minus 130. If you were just thinking as a modeler, you'd be like, wow, minus 130 fair with minus 105? What a great deal. That's so much better than minus 110. Now, let's say BetOnline's the only book in the market with this number, and we think they're pretty sharp. So we're going to automatically think, okay, we're probably overestimating. Our only piece of information is sharp book, BetOnline. And just like we move towards Pinnacle, we would move towards BetOnline. So maybe the actual fair when incorporating BetOnline's information into our number is like minus 115. So all of a sudden, the minus 110 bet becomes a better value than the minus 130 bet into the same minus 105. And so that's kind of the breakdown of why it matters. The 4 commandments of betting with market info. Commandment number 1, bet the best price possible. There's 2 main reasons. The first main reason is it protects you from being very, very wrong. If you're betting into a market and you're thinking like the most you could theoretically lose is the juice, you have a situation where there's like 8 different books in the market. Somebody's showing like minus 110 on an over that you like, but someone else is showing minus 105, but you don't, it might be harder for you to bet there. On the other side of the board, you're seeing another book that's like minus 120 plus 100. So the actual size of the market is minus 105 plus 100, a tiny amount of juice. And in that situation, like if you're betting the minus 105, you're cutting your theoretical loss in half compared to like just going and betting a bad number. And this leans into like one of my favorite sayings in gambling is, well, it can't be that bad. Like when you bet the best price, it can't be that bad. And we want to put ourselves into situations where it can't be that bad. That's basically what I've been trying to do my entire gambling career. So the reason that sports betting is so different from financial markets is in financial markets, it's very rare for a price to diverge significantly from market maker to market maker, exchange to exchange. In sports betting, it happens all of the time still. And that's the reason that sports betting is easier than financial markets. And if you don't bet the best price, you're turning sports betting into like a more efficient financial market, which is harder to win, and your max win becomes lower. A good model into bad prices is a bad model, right? So you want to have a good model into good prices. That's when you're really on the right track. Okay, commandment number 2. Be more willing to bet into square books than sharp books. Part of this is knowing who's sharp and who's square in your markets. And a good way to do this is collect a lot of data on how your model does betting against them, or like in the back test, every time it would bet against them, how do you do it against that book? And if you can kind of figure out a way to bet into them, fake bet into them a lot to kind of see if your mid or their mid is better. There's a lot of ways to kind of test this. You want to be more willing. It's not saying don't bet into sharp books. And there's different times to bet into sharp books, and we'll get to that. You should be more willing to size up, lower your edge threshold, everything when it's a square book as opposed to a sharp book. And let's take an example where you have 2 options for a golf match. So option number 1 is you're offered a golf match by Billy Walters, the legendary sports bettor and golf gambler. He says, shucks, JP, I'm a 6 and I haven't been playing that much, but I'll play you to a 5. I think that'd be fair. And then you have your dumb friend who is a 6 handicap in the gin system, but you've seen him. He takes a bunch of mulligans. He gives himself every 4-foot putt, and he's certainly not a 6, right? And they both offer you a match for a lot of money. If you had a model that was a basic model saying, what is opponent's handicap and gives you a win probability, your model would want to choose playing the 6 instead of, it would want you to choose a 6 giving, only 5 strokes instead of the pure 6. And if you don't know golf handicaps, what I mean is basically Billy's giving you a discount, so your model would want that. But in reality, Billy's probably like a scratch, and you're going to lose 100% of the time to him. Whereas your friend, who's like a 6, you're going to beat every time, right? So it matters who's offering you the bet. If Billy Walters is offering you the bet, you probably don't want to take it, or you're less likely to want to take it than your dumb friend. So it's the same exact concept for deciding whether to be more aggressive betting into certain books than the others. Like, a lot of top-down discussion comes around which books are sharp, right? And it matters a lot in top-down. Okay, the third commandment is bet early. People say this in different ways. They might say you got to be fast. Do you have a speed advantage, right? But I like to say bet early because to me it defines the opportunities better, because the EV of a bet after it's posted to an odds board or whatever, like right when it becomes public, it starts declining over time. My podcast I do with sports projections, we recently did a big one on adverse selection, that you want to make sure that you're not only getting to bet when you have a disadvantage. So in this situation, why this matters in timing is right when the bet's posted, theoretically no one's seen it, right? So if for whatever reason you are the first person to see all the bets, or your model is the first model to see all of the bets, then the edge you're showing is more likely to be a true edge. Let's say now you're the 5th person to see the bet, but 4 really smart people have already seen all the bets, and their models have seen the bets. You have to decide, is this actually an edge? Or did the fact that these 4 smart people all saw this bet and decided not to bet it make it less likely that it is an edge? Because remember, right, like our model's never correct, and that's the underpinning of this whole video, is that our model's never correct. So we're always going to be using other information to gauge how confident we can be on our model. When 4 smart people pass on a bet that our model wants to bet, I'm less inclined to think it's a good bet. But it shows why being fast is important, because it allows you to bet, both the good and the bad bets. If you're first, maybe you did bet that bad bet, but you would have bet the 4 bets that moved too. You have 4 good bets and 1 mediocre one, and you're going to make money. But if you're slow, you're left with the 1 mediocre one. It's going to be really hard to make money that way. Now, in this first example, we were assuming that basically we could bet the same amount at every time. And there's a very important caveat that is practical in the sports betting markets. It's that just think like really level 1 and be like, early lines are probably easier because sports books will take less money on them. And as it gets later, and as more people have seen the lines, suddenly they're willing to take more money. And like that is almost all you need to determine that the commandment number 3 is correct, is a good commandment, that we want to bet early. In reality, as sportsbooks increase their limits, there's an opportunity for you to make more money at a lower ROI. Let's say you're you're the top, you're the end boss originator in this one market, right? When lines are first dropped, you have the option to bet the openers. And you have, let's just say you have a 6% ROI on openers, but you can only bet $500, right? But if you bet the line, then they'll move the line and you'll no longer have a profitable bet. 6%, $500, you're making $30. You have the second option, which is wait until closer to the close, when they will move the limits up 10x to $5,000. And you don't do as well against the close. You won't. That's just how this goes. Like, don't imagine that just because you're the best doesn't mean you're going to do as good against the close as the open. You'll always do better on the open or against the open than the close. Instead of getting 6%, your ROI might be 2%. But at 2%, at $5,000, you're making $100 a bet. That's not bad. That's $70 more than you were making betting the open with your 6% ROI. It may be wise for you to wait and bet later. But there's one situation where it's never wise to wait. These are special situations in betting, and you should always know which books operate like this, which is the books that post full limits right away. And the interesting thing is that rec books kind of exist like this, especially if you're in a VIP program, is you can bet a lot on an opener, which doesn't happen on a sharp book. You know, the books that are going to increase their limits over time, this is like Bet Online, Pinnacle, FanDuel starting to do this, and they're transparent with their limits, right? So over time you'll be able to bet more, usually sharp books. This is kind of their market making model. But on books that just post their full limit right away, depending on the market, like Bet Chris will even do this. Some other sharp books, or another situation was like Prize Picks or Underdog back in the day, or probably now, they would always take the same max unit size no matter what time. So you'd want to really be early. In those situations, it's super important to be the first one there. In these other examples, the best bettors have no incentive to wait. So this is like a free-for-all, like first to the number type situation. And in those, you want to be able to be aware of what those are and make it a special priority to be first to those situations, right? It's going to be a tighter race. You have less time. So those are where you really want to be good at being quick. And when I mean be quick, it's be early. Same thing goes for certain market information, injury news, limit increases. A sharp book comes out that agrees with your price. Being early to these pieces of news is super important and will absolutely increase your model's ROI. All of this stuff is to be able to use it as efficiently as possible. Okay, and the fourth and final commandment is be more willing to bet into a model than into a market. And this was popularized by Interception. It was a book by Matt Davidow and Ed Miller. And the gist of it is this. So a sports book, let's say they have an opener. They have to come up with that number somewhere, right? And that number, the first thing they post is often either a data provider who has their own model, tells them, hey, we think, based on some math, we think like this line should be this, or they have an internal thing that does that. Other things that don't have a lot of heavy betting volume are often set by models. So derivatives, like they might have a derivative model off the main line. Certain, lower volume player props, that type of stuff, the price up there that is that you'll see is actually set most likely just based on math, and it hasn't been knocked around by different by a bunch of different people. When I talk about wanting to bet into a model instead of a market, it means you're wanting to bet against one person or one model instead of a bunch of them. Okay, now let's talk some top down. Let's end with some top down applications. And if you're watching this and you're a top down bettor, I'm pretty sure that you started to pick up on stuff that I was talking about that can still be applied to top down, because we're talking about basically how to take a fare and use that fare with our brain to make more money. A top-down application of one of the examples, let's say it's like the time-based example, commandment number 3. You get a Steam-based alert like GP Picks Plus, but you didn't see it. And 20 minutes later, the price is still there. If you were just focused on, okay, this is my model, I'm going to trust the number, and the number says, Steam moves, fares this, its value, like you would still bet it. But we all know that that's worse than being the first person to go catch it at a book where it hasn't moved. Because if it's still available, it means that like at that point, the sportsbook had the opportunity to move and they chose not to. So that matters, right? You can kind of see the corollaries between all of the different things we've talked about and how they could be applied to a more robust top-down model. I think, one thing that I looked into when kind of trying to increase the ROI for GP Picks Plus is to be more selective, to be more cautious in situations where you're sending out a bet, but there's a sharp book or two that's very close to that bet's price. Once you gather a huge amount of market data, you can actually start to make pretty good guesses as to what books are sharp and what books are sharp and where. The one thing I've learned while working on GP Picks Plus is like a lot of the books people think are sharp, but there's some that aren't as sharp, and some square books that might be sharp in a certain place. And when you get a lot of data, then you can actually make decisions about these. So like if you're wanting to use market information, an important part of that is gathering market information. I wanted to kind of talk about this at the end of the video because there was something I was thinking about doing with GP Picks Plus, and I threw this into the Discord. So if you're interested, please go into the Discord, DM me, or send me an email, john@goldenpants.com. I was thinking we've basically built these custom feeds where you can kind of point and click your way to building your own custom Steam bot, right? And we have all this data, and I think there seems to be an appetite for a product like a high level product. Think like it's going to be expensive, right? It's like OddsJam Platinum, like that type of BetStamp, Pro, all of this stuff, because the data is very valuable. But giving you the data and allowing you to build, like more easily build top-down models that leverage these like interesting interactions. Like this book is sharp here where you didn't think it was going to be. It takes a certain level of technical ability. I would rather you kind of reach out to me and we can kind of see if it's a good fit. I also think you need a bit of a larger bankroll to do this, but if this is of interest, a lot of people have responded to me already in the Discord, but want to make it more of a public announcement if you're interested. Appreciate everybody watching. I hope you learned something valuable in this video. Hopefully we're going to get a few more of these. Like this video, it took a long time to kind of write, plan, record. I'm pretty tired right now. But I like making these. I'd rather make a few really good videos, but I'd still like to make more of them. So I'm really hoping that this brings maybe less, a little more than once every 2 months or whatever, like monthly. If I could really have it my way and push myself once every 2 weeks, I think that would be the absolute maximum. I could, release videos and have them be the quality I want them to be. If you did learn something from this, please like, subscribe, let me know in the comments, because honestly, like there's a big correlation between people saying something helped them in the comments and then me getting like really psyched up to make another video. So let me know if this helped, and check out the audio pod. I'm really having fun doing that with sports projections. Thanks everybody for listening, and I will see you in the Discord or see you on the next video.